Okay, question to both Paul and to Tony. I'll just ask him generally, really, how difficult it's been to offer leadership at such a challenging time.
Well, obviously, first of all, it's an unprecedented situation, so it's really difficult for everyone at the club. I would say Paul has done an exceptional job. He's our front man. He's speaking to the staff regularly. He has town halls once every 1 or 2 weeks. We've had fans forums, we're doing press conferences, and obviously in regular contact with all the senior management, looking at the situation the best that we can, and planning out different scenarios about when the season may start, whether the season will finish or not, recruitment at the end of the season. There's so many things going on. And, I'd like to pay tribute to him and all of his executive staff who in this really difficult times have done very, very well.
And Paul?
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenge. As Tony said, we're having to learn new skills almost on the hoof. There's no script for managing your way through a situation like this, but the staff have been brilliant. They've maintained their focus and their professionalism. They're all working from home. Different departments send a report each week on what they've done and what they're doing and what they're planning to do. So, that people are very conscious, I think, of maintaining their integrity through this process. This isn't a holiday. This isn't an extended bank holiday or anything like that. People are doing their, level best to do their jobs from home. And in some cases, they're homeschooling. In some cases, they're dealing with family members that are not very well. In some cases, they're dealing with elderly relatives who are isolated and trying to look after them as well. So it really is quite difficult for everybody. But as Tony said, we've been doing a regular staff video conference. I think we had 270 staff members on the last Zoom call, which is quite intimidating when you see a huge array of faces looking at you. And we've done fans forums, which have been great. We do our weekly press conference, which I think has been a good thing for us as well as hopefully for you. And we're dealing with lots and lots of calls and emails and usual stuff in between. So to be honest, it's just about getting your head into the right place and realizing you've got to take the situation for what it is and try and lead through it the best you can. But also be honest with people, be transparent and not make promises that you can't keep. And I think we've been very clear with our staff all the way along that we'll tell them what we know, we'll tell them what we think is happening, but what we won't do is make guarantees or promises that we may not be able to keep.
And Tony, how much worse has this situation been for your club? Because you'd already posted quite a heavy loss fairly recently.
Look, this situation is really difficult. I mean, first of all, we think of all the people in this country and worldwide who are suffering with this terrible virus. And obviously that comes first. We have to do everything we can from a football perspective, from a business perspective, to look at all the various scenarios, but it is really difficult. This is our third year in the Premier League. It will be the first year we did record a profit. These 2 years, we are going to be making losses. That's even before the coronavirus hit us. And that was all planned. We've put a lot of investment into players. So the key was obviously just staying in the Premier League, doing everything that we can to do that. So we've made a big investment in players. So a lot of the losses through the amortization of some of those transfers on the players. The idea is with all the investment in the academy coming through, some of those losses won't continue. But obviously this is a complete outlier, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to plan for. And so we don't know what the extent of the losses will be. It really depends when football comes back. But it's very, very difficult for us to plan and deal with. But we will do everything we can. And I've got an excellent staff who will who are doing a really good job to help us through this difficult situation.
Would a null and void situation suit you right now, Tony? I mean, do you believe there's an appetite either at your club or even elsewhere within the league to get the fixtures finished? Time is wearing on now, isn't it?
From our point of view, and I think the majority of the Premier League clubs, we would very much like to finish the season. That's what we started off doing. I know we're in a position close to the relegation zone, but for the integrity of the league, it would be very good to finish it. But there are significant issues, particularly as time goes on, and we don't see football continuing in the short term. I mean, there's, it's still huge amounts of people having the virus, hospitals under a lot of pressure. It wouldn't be appropriate at this time. So we're obviously waiting to hear. The Premier League is in constant contact with the government, with the health officials, and I think it would be great for the country as a whole when football can continue, when it's safe to continue. But we really don't know the timing on that. And obviously there's big issues with contracts from the end of June. So I have no idea what will actually happen, but we have to be prepared. And it's very difficult for Graham and our players to prepare for the season to restart. We're 2 points off the relegation zone, but mentally, when it comes to it, we have to be prepared to play those final 9 games of the season.
And Paul, businesses hate uncertainties. Yours is no different. Does it make sense to have a cut-off period after which the season can't then continue? Possibly June the 30th has been mooted anyway.
Well, I think June the 30th is out there just simply because traditionally in football, that's when all of our contracts tend to come to an end, whether it's playing or commercial or whatever. But as Tony said, we are all committed to try and finishing the season because the integrity of the competition, I think, largely relies on that. We start the season wanting and expecting to play 38 games, and that's where, the season would normally end up, and that's where we want to be. But at the moment, I think, as Tony said, it's very difficult to foresee playing football at this time when there are still so many significant issues for people's health, and the pressure that the government and the health authorities are under right now. I'm sure football is a little bit down their agenda. But in terms of lifting the nation's spirits at some point, I think we all know that we would love to be able to focus on a date when we could play again. Even if it's behind closed doors, it will give everyone something to look forward to. But at the moment, that's not the priority. The priority is making sure people are safe and well.
Question to both of you, if I may. You both have been around the game a long time, particularly you, Paul, at other clubs and other organisations. Is there an opportunity now for this sport, football, to recalibrate and perhaps ensure that not quite as big a proportion of your revenue goes towards players? Because it's managing the wage situation now that's the problem for most clubs at all levels, isn't it? I mean, your club, I think your club's 71, according to the last account, 71% of your turnover went to players.
Tony, I'll let you go first on that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure the 71% for players is quite right. That may be something regarding to all salaries, but it is a very high percentage. And in an ideal world, it would be less. And as we all know, it's very difficult for football clubs to be profitable. I mean, outside of some Premier League clubs and perhaps the odd club in the lower leagues, particularly, they sell a player for a good amount of money for their league. Most clubs do make losses. So it's a very difficult situation because it's such a competitive marketplace. And in the Premier League, the salaries are very high. We've got one of the lowest player salaries, and it's still a very high number. So in an ideal world, it would be lower, and it would make situations like this a little easier, and it would make being profitable and more sustainable easier for all clubs. I think after this situation has resolved, hopefully, and that doesn't take too long, I do think football will come together, because at the moment, a lot of our football clubs are at risk of not only going to administration, but of going bust. And we were all devastated when Bury went out of existence. We know how key these football clubs are to their community. So it is a big concern going forward that more clubs in this country and in other countries will fold. So I think it does need to be looked at all levels, because it really is unsustainable. And I think it needs something like this crisis to perhaps get across some significant sustainable change.
Paul?
Well, hard to add to that, Aidan. I think the chairman summed it up brilliantly there.
Okay, just on the next one then, I mean, you talked about football coming together. I mean, is it time for a salary cap? And I appreciate that's difficult because that could make you less competitive with leagues around Europe. Is it something that the whole of Europe and the whole of the world game, with the assistance of the governing bodies, need to come together on to discuss a salary cap? Because that's the only way you're going to bring in sustainability, isn't it? Because that's the major cost, player wages, that's spiraling out of control and has been at all levels for some years now. Tony first.
Yeah, a salary cap, I say, is very complicated. If it's going to work, it needs to be worldwide, certainly Europe-wide, and I see big difficulties with that. But if it is workable, and if leagues at least around Europe, if not the world, can come to some agreement on it, and I'm sure there's some legal issues there as well, but something I think does need to change. Otherwise, salaries, player salaries will always increase far too much, and it becomes unaffordable, for clubs. But clubs, again, are under pressure to be competitive in their leagues. There's pressure from their fan base. There's pressure, in terms of not being relegated for financial reasons. There's all sorts of pressures, and it's very, very difficult for clubs, on the one hand, to be competitive and not to be seen not to be doing right by their club. On the other hand, we've seen a lot of clubs spend far too much money, be unsustainable, and put the club's long-term viability on the line. So it is really difficult, but certainly I think something like that will be talked about. I see it being very difficult to come to fruition now.
Paul, can I ask you about I think you mentioned a few moments ago about players' contracts expiring at the end of June. I mean, even if Tony alluded to the complications in future there, but even if a player's contract is extended on the say-so of FIFA or UEFA or whoever, it's not going to supersede UK law, is there? I mean, there's nothing to stop a player walking away on June the 30th in accordance with the contract that they signed. And that's one of the complications, I imagine, for not just you, but possibly all the clubs.
For all the clubs and all the different leagues. I mean, I think FIFA are trying to regulate and legislate across a whole number of countries, 200 countries, most of which have got very different legal systems. So it's very, very complicated. I mean, just going back to your earlier question, I mean, I work with a salary cap in Major League Soccer, and it has pluses and minuses. There are pluses in the sense that you do know, what your outgoing is going to be for your players, which is obviously a massive plus and helps to keep the health of the football club, the financial health of the football club in check. But it presents other challenges when a player believes that they are worth more than you're able to pay them, and you end up losing them to another league in the world. So as Tony said, the only way it can really work is if there's some kind of global acceptance of salary caps, and then with different income levels for different clubs in different leagues, it becomes a very, very complex process to maintain and regulate. On paper it looks great and it looks simple, but in reality it could be very different, and it could also, I suspect, be challenged legally as well.
Question to you both: how the talks progressing with your players, Lewis Duncan and Glenn Murray? I understand that there's talk of a wage cut. I think is there an exception among the players that a wage deferral doesn't really solve the problem? It just kicks the problem further down the line. Do the players have to get into the real world? How are those talks progressing?
I'll go first on this one, I guess. I mean, first of all, Lewis and Glenn have been absolutely superb in the way that they've conducted themselves. They've been very, very careful to gather as much information as possible, not just from the league and from the PFA on the original call a weekend or so ago, but also from us directly. And we prepared for them a very detailed schedule of, as Tony alluded to earlier, the losses that we were anticipating making this year and budgeted to make this year, what the cost of this crisis could be. And of course, at the moment, it's still very difficult to determine exactly what it could cost, because we don't know when we're going to play, and if we do play, whether it will be behind closed doors or not. And we laid all of that out for them, gave them the costs of our player salaries in the round, and also the same for our non-playing staff salaries. So we gave them a complete picture of our financial position. They understand it. They respect all of that Tony has done for the club over the last decade, the investment that's been made and the losses that Tony's incurred. And their attitude is that they want to help in some way. What we haven't yet determined is the detail of that. We haven't determined the timing of that just yet. But again, I think it's important that, we acknowledge that they had contracts that were effectively guaranteed, are guaranteed. So, we're in a position where we accepted that right up front. But what we tried to do is to say to them, look, this is an unprecedented situation. The financial pressure on us at the moment is something we couldn't possibly have foreseen. We're all in this together. We've got to try and protect as many jobs as we can in our football club for as long as we can. And in order for us to do that, we're going to need some help from you. And, you know, we've presented it in that way. And I think they've appreciated the openness with which we presented it. And also the fact that we've not applied huge amounts of pressure. We deliberately have not put their backs against the wall and made them feel as if they're, you know, being pushed into something. They need to think it through. They need to talk it through with 23 other colleagues in the squad. And we trust them to do that. And that's what's going on at the moment.
You feel the same, Tony?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to pay tribute to Lewis and Glenn, who have had many discussions with Paul and Dan, and obviously the rest of the playing squad. And it is a difficult situation for them. But what I would like to say is, I think it is time for the PFA to step up to the mark, to really look at the situation around the long-term implications of not being more open to some of the suggestions. And I'm thinking not just the Premier League, but particularly lower down the leagues. You know, some of these clubs are going to be under huge financial pressure because of player salaries. And it's thinking about when those existing players' contracts run out, you know, is it in their interests if the PFA are too intransigent? And for the younger players who don't even have contracts, for the longer good of the game, I just think in this particular situation, they really do need to be more open-minded to such a difficult situation for the football clubs.
Just finally, a question to both of you. How are you coping at home? How's life changed above and beyond football even?
Yeah, it's challenging. I don't think any of us like to be stuck at home all day. The kids are being homeschooled. The older ones, it's easier. He's on his computer with his teachers and classmates all the time. My youngest is 7 years old, and you know that it's a different situation. But we miss going out, we miss doing things, but obviously we totally understand it's the right thing to stay at home and be safe. And you know the priority is to reduce the number of people who get this virus and to help out the health services. And it's really difficult for us all. But I'd say I'm luckier than most in terms of we've got a garden, and my family members are well.
Cool.
Yeah, the same for me, Aidan. I think I'm delighted that everyone so far is safe and well here, which is good. I've got 2 of my 3 children now back at home for the first time in several years, so that's a bit of a shock to the system for them as well as me. But they're both working from home, and they're getting on with their jobs, which is good. And I think it's a bit of a shock for my wife as well to have all of us under her feet every day. But I think everyone's having to adjust. We're all in the same boat, and it's difficult, but it's not impossible. There are people that are sick and worse at the moment. So I think just to have to adjust to working from home is a small inconvenience at a terrible time.
And you'll be out tonight clapping for the NHS, 8 o'clock?
For sure. Yeah, we've done it. Our street is very, very supportive. We've got 2 NHS doctors that live directly opposite us, and we're grateful for all they're doing. And the whole street has turned out every Thursday night so far. It's been very, very impressive.
Tony, I wonder if I could just follow up from that last question. I think you've just had quite a significant birthday. I wondered how you celebrated, perhaps what plans had to be cancelled or at least postponed.
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't an ideal birthday. I had just travelled from the UK to Australia to be with my family, who had already come to Australia a few weeks beforehand, and we had a big celebration planned. Unfortunately, a couple of the elderly relatives weren't able to come to be safe. This was at a time when there wasn't full isolation in, but I had a lovely weekend away, but it just wasn't quite the same. And also because I just come from the UK, and on a plane, I was quite careful in terms of who I was mixing with and trying to keep distance as well. However, I had a great time with my wife, my kids, and all the Australian side of the family out here. And before I'd come back, I had a good amount of time with my parents back in Brighton as well.
Oh, well, happy birthday from all of us. As far as this situation goes, I imagine you've paid tribute to your staff. Does this give you a sort of a different? You're always looking for positives in difficult situations. Does this give you another insight? So are you learning more about your staff, seeing the way they're able to adapt and in these difficult situations, and perhaps coming up with different ideas and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think our staff have always stepped up to the plate. Paul is interacting and his team is interacting more regularly with all the staff, but I get to hear many stories of the great things they're doing. And as Paul said earlier, a lot of them have got to juggle homeschooling and being with some elderly relatives and other things. And, you know, it's not an easy adjustment to go from working in an office to working at home. And I think our staff have done a really good job. And I like to pay a lot of tribute to all of them for stepping up to the plate and being such great and loyal, you know, employees of our football club.
And for both of you, could you give us an insight into your days now? And I imagine how in the very early days, because this is completely unprecedented, was your heart sinking a lot when a message would come through or a call and you think, oh, blimey, no one had thought of that yet? Has that sort of situation calmed now? Is the football world on top of all of its different aspects, do you feel?
Well, first of all, I've just realised this is probably the most public appraisal I've ever had. So I better be careful here. I mean, I'm trying to, personally speaking, I'm trying to get as much routine into my day as I can, and I did before. So, you know, I always start the day with a run and try and get that done as early as possible. And then usually I've got a day mapped out, which involves these days video conferences instead of meetings, and phone calls that we would always have had as phone calls, and all the usual emails in between. But I think, you know, the first couple of weeks were, you know, every day, every hour of every day seemed to present a different problem and a different challenge. And, you know, as I said before, there's no script to this, Paul. You know, a lot of what we're doing here is managing by instinct. But again, I don't think that's unique to me or to football industry, or I think it's the same for everyone in every industry, whatever level they are. We're having to adapt, and we're having to some extent use our instincts rather than any kind of guidebook or script. But I think once you get your head around your new environment and how you need to work and how you need to still get things done, then actually what I've been surprised at is how quickly you do adapt. And you know, you actually become a different person in a different environment, but you're still trying to do the same things in a different way. And we're still trying to run a football club. We're still trying to, you know, protect the jobs that we've got. We're still trying to work with the league to try and get the league back together as quickly as we can. We're still trying to work with you guys to make sure you've got plenty of content. We're still trying to do all the things we used to do. We're just having to do them in a slightly different way, in a slightly different environment. The sad thing is, all around us, there's terrible news coming through at the same time. So, you know, we've been affected, thankfully, both personally and across our club, in a very small way so far by the virus. But we know that each day goes by, the chances of it affecting one of us or some of our staff more significantly is that much greater. And therefore, you know, we're very aware of that, and we're trying to manage that as best we can as well.
And before the virus hit and we went into lockdown and what, football sort of upped its game a bit on the mental health side. And I wonder, with all the challenges you're talking about that are affecting your staff, the players, everyone involved with the club, is that an area you're having to look at again now, just to check on everyone's mental health as they're coping with these unprecedented times?
Definitely, and we've divided the organisation up really into two. So the playing side have got the support they would normally have from our psychology team, and obviously from the coaching staff and from the player welfare team that's put around them. So we've put the players into a little bubble there. And then our people and culture team, our HR team, are really taking responsibility for looking after our non-playing staff. And, you know, as I said before, we're doing regular video conferences. About every 10 days, we'll get all of our staff together on a giant video conference, which is fun. And we try and make it as fun as well as serious. And, you know, we've also set aside a small budget for making sure that we treat our staff. You know, once every 10 days, we surprise them with something. You know, so far we've provided everyone with an Amazon voucher, which they could buy some games or videos or whatever for the kids. We've last week we did a food parcel, which was fresh fruit and vegetables and eggs and all the things that have been quite hard to get, but we wanted to make sure people kept eating healthily. And then tomorrow we've got another little surprise lined up for people, which again, hopefully will lift their spirits again, just to make sure that they know that, you know, even though we're trying very hard to save costs as best we can, we're also expecting them to work through a very difficult time, as I said before, with all kinds of distractions at home. And we want to try and maintain their morale and their spirit, as well as make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them. And I think maintaining their morale and spirit is critical to their mental well-being and their mental health, because if they're in a good place, then there's a fair chance they can help their family stay in a good place. And if they all stay in a good place, that's not only good for us as an organisation, but it's good for the country as a whole. You know, we can't afford to have people, failing health from a virus, but also failing mental health as well, because that combination, you know, could be very, very serious again for the NHS as well as for everybody else. So we're doing what we can. They're small things, but I think, you know, so far they've worked really well. And as I said earlier, I've been so proud of the way the staff have reacted, because this isn't a normal situation. We know that, and yet they are doing everything they possibly can to make it as normal as possible as far as their work is concerned, and that's to their credit.
Oh, good stuff. And I mean, look, that's all I need, apart from, I suppose, Paul, with the delays in deliveries and everything. Did your birthday present for Tony arrive on time? Is he still waiting for it?
Do you know what? I've kept that as a special gift for when he returns. Very, very important. Since I'm having such a public appraisal, I want him to know that now, that I've got a special gift and it's waiting here for him.
Good stuff. Thanks ever so much, chaps.
Tony, can I start with you? I mean, just how proud have you been by the way the club has responded to coronavirus? They really have set an example for other clubs when you look at the various initiatives, whether it be paying match day staff until the end of the season and also the NHS ticket initiative as well.
Yeah, I'm really proud of all of our staff, led brilliantly by Paul and his executive team, in terms of we're trying to do everything within the community to lift people's spirits, because it is such a difficult time for everyone in the country. So we are a community club, and the football club in Brighton and Hove and the whole of Sussex is so important to so many people. And so we are trying to lift people's spirits and do little things here and there. And we just know how difficult it is for everyone, you know, in the whole country. So I'm really proud of, you know, a lot of the different initiatives the staff have come up with, and we hope all those little bits that we do really, you know, really do help, you know, people in the community.
And you initially rejected the wage cut when Paul, Dan, and Graham went to you. Why did you reject it the first time, but then reluctantly accept it a couple of weeks later?
Well, they were both. All three of them were very quick off the mark to speak to me about it. So within, you know, a week or two of the first game being postponed, and I thought that was just too early. We just needed to take stock, and I still think that is true, because although I did accept it the second time round, I thought it was the right thing. You know, three of the most senior executives, the highest paid employees, not including the players. And I accept it with good grace, and I really appreciate what they have offered in terms of taking the salary cut. And I'd like to take this opportunity as well to thank so many of our staff who have also put their name forward to take some pay reductions, which I have not accepted. And the reason for that is, although there's a heavy burden, you know, on the monthly payroll when there are no games being played and nothing in the short term and so much uncertainty. But it's not the right thing to do on an ad hoc basis. If we're going to do something like that, it needs to be well planned, well thought out, and there needs to be a process behind it.
Have you found this the most challenging time you've had here as owner at Brighton?
Yeah, it is. It has to be. And I'm sure it is for many, many other chairmen and owners across the country. And the biggest difficulty is the uncertainty. We're used to having uncertainty in March and April, say about which league we're going to be in, and we plan for being in the Premier League and in the Championship. I mean, if we have a good season, then by March, April, we may be totally safe. But realistically, we know it's not unusual. But not only have we got that uncertainty, we have no idea when games are being played, whether the season's going to finish. There's a contractual situation for players who are out of contract, at the end of June. So it really is that uncertainty. And not only that, there's so many bigger issues going around in the country, people's health. None of us have ever seen anything like this before. So we don't know, there's no thing to look at about what happened 5-10 years ago when something similar happened. So we have to, look at each situation on its own merits. We have to keep reviewing situations. We have to plan for so many different scenarios. And on top of the fact that the financial extra losses could be substantial. So it's a very difficult situation for us all.
Are you resigned to the fact that you'll probably need to pump in more money than maybe you thought you would heading into whatever next season's going to look like?
Well, we have no idea what next season looks like, but for this season, it looks highly likely there will be significant extra losses. But there's a huge range on that number. And then we don't know what potentially next season looks like if the season starts late and everything else. So there's still a lot of unknowns. But yes, I am planning that unfortunately there will be significant extra funds needed in the short to medium term.
The players are playing their part with what they've been doing with the NHS and in the community as well. Are you confident that they will come to a decision and play their part to help Brighton?
I think that Lewis Dunk and Glenn Murray have been the two senior players who have been liaising with Paul Barber and Dan Ashworth on the one side and the rest of the players on the other. And they've been really, really good. They've been in constant contact, asking lots of very good questions. I don't want to predict what may happen, but I know that their sentiment is good. And I think it is the right time now for the PFA to step up and look at the wider picture of football, not just right now, but their players in the future, their current players who will have contracts potentially running out in the next year or two, and also the future players who perhaps younger players who don't even have contracts now, that the PFA needs to be thinking of those players and also the lower players lower down the league, because a lot of those clubs literally won't have money to pay wages in a month or two. And the last thing we need as a football industry is so many clubs to go not only into administration, but perhaps not even getting out of it. So I think there's a wider picture at play here, and the PFA has a big amount of responsibility.
We've seen Premier League clubs get quite a lot of criticism for deciding to furlough non-playing staff, and a few have reversed that decision. Have you now taken that off the table? Is that still something that may be possible down the line?
It's something that we're continuing to review. We're not going to do anything in the short term, but if down the line there are no Premier League games being played, no football games being played, we have to look at everything, because we are a business of playing football games. And if we don't do that, we have all of our costs and no revenues, and it's completely unsustainable. So right now, we're not looking to do anything.
And just finally, for you, Tony, in terms of what you've seen on the pitch this season, you made the decision to change the manager at the end of last season. Are you happy with what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I'm really happy with how Graham's first season is panning out. Obviously, we're not at the end of the season, so I know we're in a relegation battle, and that's really difficult for the players and Graham right now. We've got to be prepared, in the next few weeks, perhaps to start playing the last 9 games of the season. But particularly the first half of the season, I thought we played really good football. I would say that we got unlucky in a few situations. We probably should have had quite a few more points on the board. 2020 has been challenging, as everyone knows, or as long as people haven't forgotten what's happened in the Premier League in January and February. I'm still confident that if the season is played out, that we will stay up. And I have no doubt that Graham Potter will be our manager for many, many years to come.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Paul, can I just ask you about the PFA? Because last week you said that everyone needs to come together, including the PFA. Has there been any change in that in the week since you spoke?
Well, I think it's really for the players to talk to the PFA. The PFA are not directly a party to any discussions that we're having with our players, but obviously it's the players' union and the players will talk to them. And as I said before, I totally respect that the PFA have got a role to support their members, and we do respect that. But as Tony said, there comes a point in any crisis when everybody has to pull in the same direction to get the best possible outcome. And we are in the midst of football's worst crisis, and we need everyone pulling in the same direction. The worst thing that we can have is for clubs to go out of business, because that isn't going to help players at all, because there'll be fewer jobs for those players. So, we really want now for everyone to come together, to realise the scale of the issue, to trust each other, and to come to solutions that will help football, not just in the short term, but as Tony said, in the medium and longer term as well, because there's a lot of young and aspiring footballers that we're investing in our academy that soon will want professional contracts and will need clubs to be in existence for that to happen, not just at the top level, but all the way down through the pyramids.
Are you disappointed by just how long it's taken? Because it's nearly 2 weeks since the Premier League agreed on taking a 30% cut proposal, 30% deferral to the various clubs and to their players. And still, it's very few clubs that have actually agreed on this so far.
Well, first of all, in fairness to the Premier League, that what they tried to do was to create a framework which we could talk to our players individually on. And, there is no collective bargaining as such in the Premier League. You've effectively got 20 clubs who've got individual contracts with 25 players each. So it's not simple. And these contracts are guaranteed. These players are significant assets on our balance sheet. It's a complex situation, and every player within every squad is at a different stage of their lives as well, financially as well as professionally. So it was always going to take a bit of time, in my opinion. It was never likely to be solved overnight. The most important thing is the dialogue continues, the dialogue remains positive, it doesn't become personal. This is a classic business situation that we're facing here, where income has gone, costs remain very high, and we need to adjust that cost base in order to protect as many jobs as we can, and ultimately to protect as many clubs as we can. So that's where we are, and it's going to take as long as it takes. But clearly, each day that goes by, the difficulty that some clubs are in is going to get worse, and that's not healthy for anyone.
And just finally, Paul, thanks a lot for your time. There's some reports that Premier League clubs, there's some clubs pushing for a deadline for the season to be finished on the 30th of June. Are Brighton one of these clubs that are looking towards that as the cut-off point?
Well, we said before, we ideally want the season to be finished, but we also want to make sure that we don't damage next season. So there will come a point, and I don't know what that point is, which we'll have to make a call ultimately. But our priority is to get the season finished. That's by far the most important thing, but we can only do that if it's safe to do so. And so from our point of view, clearly, like any business in this situation, we would love some certainty. We would all love just that little bit more certainty so that we can plan and we can prepare and we can do all the things that we need to do. But clearly, from a financial point of view, as well as a competition integrity point of view, finishing the season is still our number one priority if it's safe to do so.
Thanks a lot for your time, Tony and Paul. Thank you.
Paul, I'll start with you if that's okay. And just on this deadline that has been reported, do you think it is feasible for the season to go on past June the 30th? I know you said it's a traditional deadline. Is that strict in your opinion?
Well, what we're dealing with now is something that pretty much has broken all the rules in every industry in every way so far. So I don't think in a crisis you can rule out anything or anyone or any idea, because no idea is a bad idea when all around you is difficult. So I think we've just got to keep an open mind, and we want to work with the league and work with our colleagues at other clubs to try and find the best solution. And we've got broadcast partners, we've got sponsors, we've got players, we've got a whole range of different stakeholders here that are relying on us to come up with a solution that is as perfect as it can be in a very imperfect situation. And I think we're all resigned to whatever happens, the season will not be the perfect finish in terms of crowds, no crowds, playing on this month or that month or on that day of the week or another day of the week. I think we're all now resigned to whatever scenario we face is going to be imperfect. It's just a question of trying to make it as good as it can be in a very difficult situation.
And I guess another part of that is if games are played behind closed doors, then there is going to be no atmosphere, is there? So the product is going to be slightly odd, isn't it? I mean, do you have any ideas off the top of your head how to make that, more entertaining, I guess?
Well, again, I think it's part of that imperfection, and the integrity of the competition is paramount alongside people's safety. So, if we have to play behind closed doors, and I think we all have to accept that we're not going to have the same product that we would expect and would love. Hopefully, that will be for a relatively short period of time, but equally, we've got to be prepared for that going on for some time. If we get back to playing football, crowds probably won't be allowed to assemble in our grounds for quite a while to come. So I think that could be our new normal. That is what we might have to get used to for a period of time. But I know at the moment, people would love to be able to see a live football match, even if it was behind closed doors. It would be something to look forward to in the future. But at the moment, I think we've just got to be prepared for every eventuality and manage it as best we can once we have some certainty.
Brilliant stuff. Tony, can I ask you about this June 30th deadline as well, please? Would that help you to say that is when this season ends?
As Paul said, I think we would very much like the season to finish whenever it does. But there does become a point when you can't keep waiting. I don't think June the 30th is that point. That point is talked about because that's when player contracts run out, sponsorships run out, and it is difficult to play beyond that. But this situation is so unique, so unprecedented. I think every option should be looked at, and it shouldn't automatically be, we can't finish before the 30th of June, therefore the season must finish. And the new season starting again in August. I think every situation needs to be looked at. In the Premier League meetings, they talk about various scenarios. I'm sure they do a lot of discussions on this, and they're in conversations with government on a regular basis. And right now, it's not a time to make any definitive decision, although we would like to for certainty, because we just don't know how this is going to play out. But at some point, a final decision has to be made because we need to be able to plan for many things, and one of them obviously is in terms of player contracts and transfers for the new season, plus a range of different operational issues as well.
Has anything caught your eye in those meetings?
I think the discussions have been interesting. The Premier League are generally updating on what's going on, and there's discussion between the clubs, and different people have different views. The next meeting's tomorrow, so the last one was almost 2 weeks ago, so that seems quite outdated. Things change so quickly at the moment.
But will you be bringing any new ideas tomorrow?
Well, possibly, depending on what the Premier League come up with. I mean, a lot of it is them updating us about how they see the situation. And the main talking point is the governmental advice, how they see the next few weeks, and when a potential return to training, return to games could be. But I don't think there'll be anything definitive tomorrow.
Yeah, and just finally from me, Tony, if I can, on the PFA, just picking up on your earlier comments, what exactly do you want them to do?
I think they should just be more engaged in the whole process and really think of the long-term situation for football clubs and their players, because it's not just a short-term thing about protecting their player salaries, because we know legally all their player salaries are protected, but they won't be, particularly for the ones lower down the leagues, if the clubs go into administration and can't pay their salaries, and in the worst-case scenario, that they cease to exist. And then there'll be less professional footballers, which is really not good for the game. And in particular, having less professional football clubs or football clubs going out of existence is absolutely really awful for their communities. I know right now football's not the main thing, and I know right now it's all about the health of our nation. But down the line, when the virus is under control or there's a vaccine or whatever it is, those football clubs in those football communities are absolutely key for the people who live there. And so that's the wider issue. I'm not saying exactly what they should do, but I think there should be much more longer term thinking from the PFA.
Great to speak to you guys. If I could just start with you, Tony. Nice to speak to you.
Hi, Johnny.
A lot of times when we've spoken to Graham and to Paul, people have talked about this being a period of reflection. Tomorrow marks the 3rd anniversary of your promotion to the Premier League. Do those memories still seem very clear in your mind?
Thank you for reminding me. It's good to get a smile on my face in these difficult times. I didn't realise it was the 3rd anniversary, but now you've said it, it's pretty obvious. Those memories will probably never go away. Hopefully, even in 30, 40 years, if I'm still here, those memories will still be very much in my mind. So yes, an amazing occasion, and it's great that we're still in the Premier League.
And what are you most proud of from that 3-year period of what you've managed to achieve both on and off the pitch?
Well, on the pitch, well, certainly the first 2 seasons, we managed to stay in the Premier League, which is always the number one priority. So huge credit to Chris and his players for doing that. And we're hopeful this season we would also stay in the Premier League. And, I think we've brought a lot to the Premier League. We've played some good football, we've had great crowds, we've had sellout crowds pretty much the whole time. And off the pitch, I just want to pay tribute to not only all the players and all the coaching staff, but all of our employees who are, have done great for this football club, and particularly in these difficult times, have really stepped up to the mark and really come up with some great ideas. And it's not easy working from home and juggling lots of different things at home. Very difficult experience for many of them, and they've done really well. So I think, I'm really pleased to have such a great staff at this football club.
And I suppose for you personally, has this been the most challenging thing you've ever encountered, particularly in your career as a businessman and the things that have been thrown at you over the years?
Yeah, it has, because it's all the time, and it's really difficult in many areas of business and life, and obviously the football club. I mean, the football club is there to play games, and there's no games being played, and there may not be any games for the foreseeable future. So we like to be optimistic, but there's a huge amount of uncertainty. There's a huge amount of financial uncertainty, and it's really difficult for everyone. And that's just from a business, financial, and football point of view. And then we're all of us well aware of the health risks and the fact that we're all staying at home, and we're doing everything we can to isolate from the wider world to reduce the virus spreading. And we don't. There's a lot of unknowns with the virus. We don't know when we get more information. We don't know what percentage of the population have had it. And obviously, the government doesn't know a lot of these answers to these difficult questions. So it's so difficult to plan. I think that is the most difficult thing now and going forward, is the uncertainty.
Well, lovely to speak to you, and nice to see you as well, Tony. Enjoy the anniversary tomorrow. Paul, if I could just ask you a couple of questions as well. Is there been any news in terms of the offer that you made in terms of the Amex and the training ground, in terms of facilities, and anything that maybe, any offers that may be taken up by the emergency services?
Yes, Johnny, we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of days, actually, on a facility at the Amex being established. We're not quite there yet, but we hope to be in a position in the next day or two to announce something on that. So, very positive, very good progress, and whatever we can do to help, we're delighted to do so.
In terms of the meeting tomorrow, I know it's difficult to know whether there'll be any kind of sort of resolution, but does there come a point where you have to say that there is a cut-off point where the season cannot be completed? I know you may not want to think about that now, but is it inevitable as the days go on that there is a finite point to this?
I think there will be, yes. I think it would be dishonest to say no. But as Tony said earlier, and I think I said as well, our priority remains completing the season, but also this secondary objective of making sure that we don't damage next season. And therefore, in order to achieve both of those objectives, somewhere in the middle, there's going to be a point at which we have to accept that it may not be possible. But we're not there yet. We still remain, as Tony said, very optimistic. We still remain very determined, but we're also very cognizant of not adding pressure to the government's list of things to do at the moment, and more importantly, or as importantly, not putting the NHS and its resources under any more pressure by pushing too hard too soon to play a sport that we all love, but in the scheme of things is way down the priority list right now.
And how important, finally, Paul, is it that everyone remains open-minded? I mean, it may be that there's a solution out there that hasn't been suggested yet that someone might be able to come up with. All parties must remain open-minded, mustn't they?
Definitely, and that's why we use this phrase. It is a bit of a cliche, but no idea is a bad idea in a situation like this, because you just don't know. One idea that may not be quite right might spark another idea that is. So I think we have got to keep an open mind, and hopefully, someone somewhere will find that magical solution that we're all looking for, that takes away the uncertainty, but also is cognizant of everything that's going on in our country, but not just our country, right the way across the world at the moment.
Hi, Tony. Just wanted to clarify, in terms of the PFA, what do you sort of feasibly think can be done to reach a sort of solution?
From the way I see it, it's really important for them to be central to their discussions with their players all through the leagues, because it's not just about the PFA saying, well, the contracts are set in stone, which they are, and so the clubs have to pay them, because it goes much wider than that, because many clubs won't be able to pay those salaries, particularly if games aren't played soon. One has to think of the wider ramifications if clubs can't, clubs go into administration, etc. So I don't have the solutions. All I'm saying is discussions, meaningful discussions to try and work together with clubs to come to solutions is the way forward.